Admiral Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the UEF Vigilance, watching the red planet Mars slowly turn beneath them. The space station orbited the planet like a metal moon, its silver hull reflecting the distant sun. Rivera had been commanding deep space patrols for 3 years now, ever since humanity had finally cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel. Most of his missions were boring routine checks of empty space. Looking for asteroid threats or checking on the outer colonies? Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka sat at her communications station, monitoring the usual chatter from Earth and the Mars colonies. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep from the sensor stations. Rivera was reading reports from the other 11 ships in humanity's small deep space fleet when Tanaka suddenly straightened in her chair. "Admiral, I'm picking up something strange," Tanaka said, pressing her headphones closer to her ears. "It's not coming from any human source." Rivera moved to her station, feeling his heart rate increase. In the 3 years since humans had been traveling between stars, they had never encountered any sign of alien life. Every planet they had visited was either dead rock or empty ocean worlds with nothing more complex than bacteria. "What kind of signal?" Rivera asked, leaning over Tanaka's shoulder to look at her instruments. "It's definitely artificial, sir. The pattern is too regular to be natural, but it's not like anything in our databases. The frequency is shifting in a way that suggests intelligence, but the language is completely unknown." Tanaka worked her controls, trying to clean up the signal. Static filled the bridge speakers, mixed with strange harmonics that sounded almost musical. Then suddenly, words began to emerge from the noise. Not human words, but somehow the meaning was clear in their minds. "This is Counselor Vila of the Andorian Republic," the voice said, female and desperate. "Our system is under attack by an unknown force. They call themselves the Swarm. We are a peaceful people with no military capabilities. Any civilization capable of faster-than-light travel, please respond. We are trying to evacuate our population, but they have cut off our escape routes. Millions of lives are at stake." The bridge fell silent. Rivera felt cold sweat on his forehead as the implications hit him. This was first contact with an alien species, and they were calling for help. He looked around at his crew, seeing the same shock and uncertainty in their faces that he felt in his own chest. "Where is this signal coming from?" Rivera asked. Tanaka checked her instruments. "The Helix Nebula, sir. About 40 light-years from here. The signal is very weak, which means it's probably much stronger at the source. They must be broadcasting on multiple frequencies to reach this far." The alien voice continued, growing more desperate. "The swarm ships are unlike anything we have ever seen. They are consuming our outer planets, literally eating the matter and converting it into more of their vessels. Our defensive platforms were destroyed in the first wave. We estimate 3 days before they reach our population centers. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need immediate evacuation assistance." Rivera turned to his tactical officer, Commander Alex Morgan. "How long would it take us to reach the Helix Nebula?" Morgan consulted his navigation computer. "At maximum hyperspace. A velocity, about 3 weeks, sir. But that's assuming we can maintain top speed the entire journey. We've never attempted such a long-range mission." "What about the rest of the fleet?" Rivera asked. "The other ships are scattered across human space on various missions. It would take at least a week to recall them all to a single location, then another 3 weeks to reach the alien system. By then, according to their message, it would be far too late." Rivera paced the bridge, his mind racing. Humanity had only 12 deep space-capable ships, and they were designed more for exploration and patrol duties than military action. They had weapons, but nothing like what would be needed for a major space battle. The smart thing would be to report this to Earth Command and let the politicians decide what to do. But the desperation in the alien's voice reminded him of something else. Just 50 years ago, humanity had been facing their own extinction as Earth's environment collapsed. Only the development of space colonies and terraforming technology had saved the species. He remembered his grandfather's stories about the great evacuation ships that had carried millions of people to new worlds when the old one was dying. Sir, Tanaka interrupted his thoughts. The signal is getting weaker. I think their transmission station might be under attack. The alien voice came through the speakers again, but now there were sounds of explosions in the background. This is Counselor Vila. The swarm has reached our fourth planet. The entire world is being consumed. We are falling back to our inner system. If anyone receives this message, please know that we tried to be good neighbors to the galaxy. We have shared our knowledge freely and harmed no one. We do not understand why this is happening to us. Rivera made his decision. Tanaka, send a recall message to all fleet ships. Emergency gathering at Mars Orbital Station. Tell them to come ready for extended deep space operations. Sir? Morgan looked surprised. Are we really going to attempt a rescue mission? We don't know anything about this enemy force or what we might be facing. That's exactly why we need to go, Rivera replied. These aliens are facing extinction, just like we did. If we don't help them, who will? Besides, if this swarm is consuming entire planets, they might not stop with one species. Earth could be next. Over the next 6 hours, the human fleet gathered around Mars, 12 ships in total, the largest being the battleship UEF Defiance and the smallest being the scout vessel UEF Swift. They were a mixed collection of exploration ships, patrol boats, and converted civilian vessels that had been pressed into military service. Together they represented humanity's entire deep space capability. Rivera transferred his flag to the Defiance and called a meeting of all ship captains. The holographic conference room filled with worried faces as he explained the situation. Some of the captains were excited about the prospect of first contact with aliens. Others were concerned about the risks of traveling so far from human space to face an unknown enemy. What if this is a trap? Asked Captain Torres of the assault vessel UEF Warhammer. What if these aliens are luring us away from Earth to attack our home system while we're gone? That's a risk we'll have to take, Rivera replied. But I don't think so. The desperation in their voice sounded genuine. Besides, if they had the ability to attack Earth, why would they need to trick us into leaving? Dr. Elena Vasquez, the science officer aboard the research vessel UEF Darwin, raised another concern. We know nothing about their technology or biology. We might not even be able to communicate with them directly. And we certainly don't know anything about this swarm they're fighting. That's why we're bringing you along, Doctor, Rivera said. We'll have 3 weeks of hyperspace travel to analyze their transmissions and learn what we can. By the time we arrive, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of the situation. The final concern came from Captain Diana Ross of the engineering vessel UEF Builder. Sir, our ships weren't designed for extended combat operations. We're explorers and peacekeepers, not a battle fleet. If this swarm is powerful enough to consume entire planets, what can 12 human ships do against them? Rivera looked around the room at his captains. These were good people, brave enough to leave everything they knew behind to explore the unknown regions of space. Now he was asking them to risk their lives for aliens they had never met. I won't order anyone to come, he said finally. This mission is voluntary. Any ship that wants to remain in human space can do so without prejudice. But I'm going, and I hope you'll come with me. These aliens reached out to anyone who could hear them. They didn't ask what species we were or what we wanted in return. They just asked for help. That tells me something about their character. The captains looked at each other, having silent conversations with their eyes. One by one, they nodded their agreement. Whatever they were about to face, they would face it together. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Tanaka picked up one last transmission from the Andorian system. The signal was very weak and full of static, but Counselor Vila's voice could still be heard. Unknown vessels approaching our system. We detect your hyperspace signatures. Please identify yourselves. Are you friend or foe? We are running out of time. The transmission cut off abruptly with the sound of explosions. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures moving through the Andorian system. Too large and numerous to count accurately, Rivera gave the order. and 12 human ships disappeared into hyperspace, racing toward a distant star system, where an alien species was fighting for survival against an enemy that consumed worlds. The 3-week journey through hyperspace gave the human fleet time to prepare for whatever they might find in the Andorian system. Captain Elena Vasquez worked around the clock aboard the UEF Darwin, using every piece of equipment on her science vessel to analyze the alien transmissions they had recorded. Her team included Dr. Raj Patel, a linguist who specialized in decoding unknown languages, and Dr. Amira Hassan, a xenobiologist who had spent years theorizing about alien life forms. The Andorian language structure is fascinating, Dr. Patel reported during one of their daily briefings with Admiral Rivera. They use harmonic frequencies to convey emotional context alongside the basic meaning of words. It's almost like they're singing their conversations instead of just speaking them. Dr. Hassan had been studying the technical specifications that the Andorians had included in their distress calls. Their technology is impressive but completely peaceful in application. Everything they've described is designed for construction, terraforming, or scientific research. I haven't found a single reference to weapons or military equipment in any of their transmissions. This information worried Admiral Rivera. A species that had no weapons would be helpless against any aggressive force, especially one capable of consuming entire planets. He spent his time reviewing tactical reports from Commander Morgan and planning different scenarios for what they might encounter. The energy signatures we detected suggest ships much larger than anything in our fleet, Morgan reported. Some of the readings indicate vessels that could be several kilometers long. If these swarm ships are that massive, our weapons might not be effective against them. Meanwhile, the other ship captains were preparing their crews for the unknown. Captain Torres had his Marines practicing boarding operations in case they needed to fight inside alien vessels. Captain Ross was working with her engineers to modify human weapons and equipment to be more effective in space combat. Every ship in the fleet was checking and rechecking their systems, knowing that mechanical failures could be fatal so far from human space. During the second week of their journey, Dr. Patel made a breakthrough in understanding Andorian communications. Admiral, I've been analyzing the mathematical concepts embedded in their language. These aliens think very differently from humans. They seem to assume that all intelligent species are naturally cooperative and peaceful. Their entire civilization appears to be built on the idea that conflict between thinking beings is impossible. That would explain why they have no weapons, Rivera replied. But it also means they're completely unprepared for something like this swarm. Dr. Vasquez had been trying to understand more about the enemy they were about to face. From what I can piece together from the Andorian transmissions, the swarm appeared without warning about 2 weeks ago. They didn't attempt any communication or negotiation. They simply began attacking and consuming everything in their path. Consuming. How? Rivera asked. That's the disturbing part. The Andorians described their planets being literally eaten by the swarm ships. The matter is somehow converted into new vessels or used to expand existing ones. It's unlike anything in our theoretical frameworks for space warfare. As they entered the third week of their journey, the fleet began receiving new transmissions from the Andorian system. The signals were much weaker now, suggesting that many of their communication stations had been destroyed. But Counselor Vila was still broadcasting, and her messages painted an increasingly desperate picture. The swarm has consumed our outer 4 planets completely, her voice crackled through the static. We have evacuated most of our population to our inner worlds, but our ships are not designed for long-term habitation. Food and water supplies are running low, and our people are beginning to panic. Dr. Patel translated additional details that revealed the scope of the disaster. The Andorian Republic had included 7 inhabited worlds with a total population of over 50 million beings. Now they were crowded onto 3 remaining planets, watching helplessly as the swarm methodically worked its way toward them. We have detected unknown hyperspace signatures approaching our system, Counselor Vila's latest message said. If these are the beings who answered our distress call, please identify yourselves. We need to know if you are friend or enemy. Time is running short. Admiral Rivera decided it was time to attempt direct communication. He had Dr. Patel prepare a message using the harmonic language patterns they had learned from studying Andorian. Transmissions. Counselor Vila, this is Admiral Marcus Rivera of the Human Space Fleet. We received your distress call and are coming to provide assistance. We will reach your system in approximately 4 days. Please provide us with tactical information about the swarm forces and the location of your remaining population centers. They had to wait several hours for a response due to the distance involved, but when it came, the excitement in Counselor Vila's voice was unmistakable. Admiral Rivera, we are grateful beyond words that you have answered our call. We had begun to fear that we were alone in facing this threat. I must warn you that the swarm forces are vast beyond our ability to count. They appear to number in the thousands of vessels, ranging from small fighters to massive harvest ships that can consume an entire moon in a matter of hours. The response continued with detailed information about swarm tactics and capabilities. The enemy ships were organic in nature, able to repair themselves and adapt their strategies based on the resistance they encountered. They showed no interest in communication or negotiation, focusing entirely on consumption and expansion. Our remaining population is concentrated on 3 worlds in our inner system, Vila explained. The planet Cathara holds our largest civilian population, approximately 30 million beings. The industrial world of Nexus Prime houses our manufacturing facilities and another 10 million citizens. Our capital world of Andoria Prime contains our government centers and the remaining 10 million of our people. Captain Vasquez analyzed this information and shared her concerns with the fleet commanders. 3 worlds, 50 million civilians, and we have no way to evacuate them with our small fleet. Even if we could somehow defeat the swarm, we don't have the transport capacity to save all those people. Rivera felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. 50 million lives were depending on 12 human ships and crews who had never faced anything like this before. But he also realized something else about the situation. Maybe evacuation isn't the only option, he said during their final planning meeting before arriving in the Andorian system. If we can find a way to destroy or drive off the swarm, the Andorians can remain on their own worlds. Commander Morgan looked skeptical. Sir, based on the descriptions we've received, we're talking about thousands of enemy vessels, some of them massive. Our entire fleet has maybe 100 total weapon systems. The mathematics don't look good. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are, Rivera replied. Humans have been fighting against impossible odds for our entire history. Sometimes the smaller force wins through better tactics or superior motivation. As the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Andorian system, their sensors immediately detected the scope of the disaster. The outer regions of the system were completely empty where planets had once orbited their star. In their place were debris fields and strange energy readings that suggested ongoing swarm operations. My God, whispered Captain Torres from the UEF Warhammer, they really did eat entire worlds. Long-range sensors detected the swarm fleet spread throughout the system. The ships were unlike anything in human experience, appearing to be grown rather than built. They moved in coordinated swarms, surrounding the inner planets where the Andorian population was making its last stand. Admiral, called Lieutenant Tanaka from her communications station, I'm receiving a transmission from an Andorian vessel. They're requesting permission to approach under a flag of truce. Rivera authorized the meeting, and an hour later the first contact between humans and aliens took place in the cargo bay of the UEF Defiance. Counselor Vila arrived with a small escort of her people, and Rivera got his first look at an alien species. The Andorians were tall and slender, with skin that shifted between blue and green depending on the lighting. Their faces were elongated, with large eyes that seemed to contain depths of intelligence and sadness. Vila herself appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, though Rivera had no way to judge alien aging processes. Admiral Rivera, Vila said, her voice carrying harmonics. That made it sound like music. I cannot express our gratitude that you came so far to help people you have never met. In 50,000 years of Andorian history, we have never encountered a hostile species. We do not understand what we have done to deserve this fate. Rivera felt a stab of sympathy for these peaceful beings who were facing extinction through no fault of their own. Counselor Vila, we came because it was the right thing to do. My species has faced extinction before. We know what it feels like to watch your world die. Vila's escort included their chief scientist, Dr. Kalin, who had been studying the swarm since they first appeared. Admiral, we have observed their operations for 2 weeks now. The swarm ships appear to be biological in nature, but with technological augmentations. They consume matter at the molecular level and use it to create new vessels or expand existing ones. Do they have any weaknesses? Commander Morgan asked. They appear vulnerable to certain energy frequencies, but our defensive platforms were not designed as weapons. We managed to damage a few of their smaller ships before our defenses were overwhelmed, but the larger vessels seemed nearly indestructible. Dr. Hassan examined tissue samples that the Andorians had recovered from damaged swarm ships. Under the microscope, the material looked more like living cells than metal or composite materials. This is incredible. It's like they've created a hybrid of biology and technology. No wonder they can repair themselves so quickly. As the humans and Andorians shared information, long-range sensors detected new movement in the system. The swarm forces were consolidating their positions and moving toward the inner planets, where the civilian population was sheltering. They're beginning their final assault, Dr. Kalin reported with despair in his voice. We estimate 40 hours before they reach our population centers. Admiral Rivera looked at his small fleet of 12 ships, then at the tactical displays showing thousands of swarm vessels. The odds were impossible, but 50 million innocent lives hung in the balance. Then we better get started, he said, and began issuing orders for humanity's first interstellar battle. Admiral Rivera stood in the tactical center of the UEF Defiance, watching the holographic display that showed the swarm forces moving through the Andorian system like a plague of mechanical locusts. The enemy fleet was even more massive than their long-range sensors had indicated. Thousands of biomechanical ships of various sizes drifted between the planets, some as small as fighters and others larger than human cities. Captain Torres had taken the UEF Warhammer on a reconnaissance mission to get closer look at the enemy vessels. His report made everyone on the command channel feel cold inside their uniforms. Admiral, these things are not like any ships I've ever seen, Torres said, his voice tight with controlled fear. The smaller ones look like giant insects made of metal and flesh. The larger vessels are consuming one of the outer moons right now. I can actually watch it shrinking as they eat it. Dr. Hassan had been analyzing the data streams from Torres sensors. The process appears to be some kind of molecular disassembly. They're breaking down the matter at the atomic level and incorporating it into their own structures. Some of the consumed material is being used to create new ships. Counselor Vila and her science team were aboard the Defiance, working with the human crew to understand their enemy. Dr. Kalin had been studying the swarm for weeks, but even he seemed horrified by what they were witnessing. We have never encountered anything like this in 50,000 years of space travel, Kalin said, his harmonic voice carrying tones of despair. The swarm shows no interest in communication or negotiation. They simply consume and expand like a cancer that spreads between the stars. Have you detected any central command structure? Commander Morgan asked, studying the tactical displays. There has to be some kind of coordination to manage thousands of ships. Dr. Kalin manipulated the holographic controls to highlight several of the largest swarm vessels. We believe these massive ships serve as command nodes. They appear to be coordinating the smaller vessels through some form of biological communication network. Destroy the command nodes and the smaller ships might become confused or disorganized. Rivera examined the highlighted targets. Each command ship was easily 10 times larger than his biggest vessel. and they were surrounded by hundreds of smaller ships that served as escorts. Getting close enough to attack them would require fighting through wave after wave of defenders. What about their weapons? Rivera asked. The smaller ships use some form of energy discharge that can overload our shields and hull plating, Kalen replied. The larger vessels have weapons that can crack open a planet's crust. We watched them use such weapons on our fourth world when the planetary population tried to evacuate underground. Dr. Hassan had been examining tissue samples from damaged swarm ships that the Andorians had recovered. Her findings added another layer of horror to their situation. Admiral, I don't think these are just ships, she reported. The biological components show signs of neural activity. I believe each vessel contains the absorbed consciousness of beings that the swarm has consumed. They're not just eating planets and people, they're adding them to their collective. The implications of this discovery sent chills through everyone. In the tactical center, the swarm wasn't just an invading force. It was a collection of every species and civilization it had ever encountered, all trapped within its biomechanical vessels and forced to serve its endless hunger. That means every world they've consumed is still alive in some form, Counselor Vila said, her voice barely above a whisper. All those civilizations, all those billions of beings, trapped forever inside those horrible ships. Rivera felt anger building in his chest. It was one thing to face an enemy that wanted to kill you or conquer your worlds. It was something entirely different to face an enemy that wanted to trap your consciousness for eternity. While using your body as raw material for more ships. Captain Diana Ross called in from the UEF builder with an update on their defensive preparations. Admiral, we've been working with the Andorian engineers to set up defensive positions around their remaining worlds. Their technology is incredible for construction and terraforming, but it's not designed for warfare. We're basically trying to turn farming equipment into weapons. What about our own weapons? Rivera asked. Our missiles and energy weapons can damage the smaller swarm ships, but the larger vessels seem to have some kind of adaptive shielding. Each time we hit them, they become more resistant to that type of attack. It's like they're learning from our attacks and developing countermeasures in real time. Commander Morgan had been running tactical simulations based on their intelligence about swarm capabilities. Sir, I've run the numbers dozens of times. Even if we achieve perfect coordination, and surprise, we can't destroy enough of their ships to make a difference. They outnumber us by more than 100 to 1. Rivera looked around the tactical center at the faces of his crew and the Andorian allies who were depending on them. 50 million innocent beings were about to be consumed by an enemy that would trap their minds forever while using their bodies to build more ships for future conquests. Then we don't try to destroy all of them, Rivera said finally. We find another way to win. Dr. Hassan looked up from her analysis station. Admiral, I've been studying the neural patterns in the swarm tissue samples. The absorbed consciousnesses aren't completely integrated. They're fighting against the collective control, trying to maintain their individual identities. If we could somehow amplify that resistance. You're talking about psychological warfare, Counselor Vila said. But how do you fight the mind of a collective that spans thousands of ships and millions of absorbed beings? Dr. Patel, who had been listening from his linguistic station, suddenly straightened with excitement. Admiral, what if we could broadcast human consciousness directly into their network? Our minds work differently from most species. We're naturally individualistic and resistant to collective thinking. That's why human societies are so chaotic compared to most alien civilizations. Rivera considered this idea. Humans were indeed notorious for their inability to form stable collective societies. Even their greatest achievements came from individuals working against the group consensus. That stubborn individualism might be exactly what was needed to disrupt the hive mind. How would we deliver such a broadcast? Rivera asked. Captain Ross answered from her engineering station aboard the builder. The Andorians have been using their terraforming equipment to create planetary communication networks. If we could modify those systems to broadcast neural patterns, instead of just audio and visual data, It would be incredibly dangerous, Dr. Hassan warned. Linking human minds directly to the swarm collective could result in our people being absorbed instead of disrupting their network. We could lose our own consciousness to the enemy. Rivera walked to the main viewport and looked out at the alien stars. Somewhere out there, the swarm was preparing to consume the last free worlds in this system. After that, they would move on to other systems, other species, spreading their horrible hunger across the galaxy until nothing remained but their endless collective consciousness. "I need volunteers," Rivera announced to the fleet. "We're going to attempt something that has never been tried before. We're going to fight a battle inside the enemy's mind." Captain Jake Morrison of the UEF Berserker was the first to respond. "Admiral, my crew and I volunteer for whatever you need. We came here to save people, and we're not going to quit now." One by one, the other ship captains announced their willingness to participate in whatever plan Rivera was developing. These were explorers and peacekeepers who had signed up to protect humanity and explore the unknown. Now they were volunteering to risk their very minds and souls to save an alien species from a fate worse than death. Dr. Hassan worked with the Andorian scientists to develop a way to broadcast human consciousness patterns using their terraforming communication networks. The process would require volunteers to link their minds directly to the swarm collective through captured tissue samples, using their individual human thoughts to create chaos in the enemy's hive mind. The volunteers will need to maintain their sense of self while experiencing the thoughts and memories of millions of absorbed beings, Dr. Hassan explained. It could drive them insane, or it could result in their consciousness being absorbed into the collective. But if it works, it might disrupt their coordination long enough for us to destroy the command ships. Rivera knew he was asking his people to risk something more precious than their lives. He was asking them to risk their very identity and consciousness. But 50 million Andorian civilians were depending on them, and the swarm would not stop with this system. As the preparations continued, long-range sensors detected the swarm forces beginning their final approach to the inner planets. Massive command ships moved like floating cities through space, surrounded by clouds of smaller vessels. Their destination was clear: the three worlds where the Andorian population was making its final stand. 36 hours until they reached the first population center. Commander Morgan reported. Rivera looked at his small fleet of 12 ships, then at the holographic display showing thousands of enemy vessels. The mathematics of the situation hadn't changed. They were still vastly outnumbered by an enemy that adapted to their weapons and could repair damage almost instantly, but now they had something else. They had a plan that didn't depend on superior firepower or numbers. They had a plan that used humanity's greatest weakness as their greatest strength. "All ships, prepare for battle," Rivera announced to the fleet. "We're going to show the swarm what happens when they try to absorb the consciousness of a species that refuses to be conquered." Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The battle for the Andorian system began at 600 hours ship time, when Admiral Rivera gave the order that would either save 50 million innocent lives or doom his small fleet to absorption by the swarm collective. The human ships moved into attack formation, their crews knowing they were about to attempt something that no species had ever tried before. Captain Nova Okafor commanded the destroyer UF Reaper, one of humanity's most heavily armed vessels. She led the first wave of attacks against the swarm's outer defensive line, using tactics that would have horrified military strategists from more civilized species. Instead of trying to avoid enemy fire, she aimed her ship directly at the largest swarm vessels, using the Reaper's reinforced hull as a battering ram. "All hands, brace for impact," Okafor announced as her ship accelerated toward a biomechanical cruiser that was 3 times her vessel's size. "And someone turn on the music. If we're going to ram these things, we might as well give them something to think about." The bridge speakers erupted with the sound of human death metal music at maximum volume. The chaotic rhythms and aggressive lyrics were broadcast on all frequencies as the Reaper slammed into the side of the swarm ship, tearing through its organic hull plating. Like a missile through tissue paper, the psychological effect was immediate and unexpected. The swarm vessel's coordinated movements became erratic as the alien, consciousness controlling it, tried to process the chaotic human music. Dr. Hassan's theory was proving correct. Human culture, with its emphasis on individualism and chaos, was toxic to a collective mind that depended on harmony and coordination. "Admiral, this is working," Okafor reported as she pulled her damaged ship away from the confused swarm vessel. "Their formation is breaking up. They don't know how to respond to our attack patterns." Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had volunteered his crew for the most dangerous part of the mission. The UEF Berserker had been modified with captured swarm tissue samples that would allow direct neural contact with the enemy collective. Morrison and his bridge crew had undergone the experimental procedure that would let them project their consciousness into the swarm's hive mind. "Initiating neural link," Morrison announced as his crew activated the hybrid biomechanical equipment that Dr. Hassan had constructed. "If this doesn't work, tell our families we died trying to do something impossible." The effect on Morrison's crew was immediate and terrifying. Their bodies remained at their stations, but their minds were suddenly experiencing the thoughts and memories of millions of absorbed beings from hundreds of conquered worlds. The sensation of existing as part of a vast collective consciousness was overwhelming, like trying to hear a single voice in a stadium full of screaming people. But Morrison and his crew were human, and humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as individuals fighting against group pressure. Instead of being absorbed into the collective, they began broadcasting their own thoughts and memories into the swarm network. Images of human history, human music, human art, and human defiance flooded through the biomechanical ships like a virus. The result was chaos on an unprecedented scale. Swarm ships that had moved in perfect coordination for millennia suddenly found their shared consciousness filled with contradictory thoughts and emotions. The absorbed beings from other species, inspired by the human example, began fighting for individual control within the collective mind. Captain Torres watched from the UEF Warhammer as entire formations of swarm ships began firing on each other, their pilots confused about which thoughts were their own and which belonged to the collective. "Admiral, their fleet is tearing itself apart. Whatever Morrison's people are doing, it's working." But the victory came at a terrible cost. Dr. Hassan monitored the vital signs of Morrison's crew and watched helplessly as their neural patterns became increasingly unstable. The human volunteers were fighting to maintain their individual identities while experiencing the combined consciousness of millions of alien minds. "Admiral, we're losing them," Hassan reported. "Their brain patterns are becoming chaotic. I don't know how much longer they can maintain the link without permanent damage to their minds." Rivera faced an impossible choice. Morrison's sacrifice was working, but it was destroying the minds of some of his best people in the process. He could order them to break the neural link and save their sanity, but that would allow the swarm to regain control of their ships and resume their attack on the Andorian worlds. The decision was taken away from him when Morrison's voice came over the communication system, distorted by the neural link but still recognizably human. "Admiral, we can see everything they've consumed. Hundreds of species, thousands of worlds, all trapped in this collective nightmare. We're not breaking the link. These people deserve to be free, even if it costs us our minds." Captain Diana Ross had been working with the Andorian engineers to create a weapon unlike anything that had ever been built before. Using terraforming technology designed to reshape planets, they had constructed a device that could disrupt neural patterns on a massive scale. The weapon was untested and potentially as dangerous to its users as to the enemy, but it was their only hope of permanently destroying the swarm's collective consciousness. "Admiral, the neural disruptor is ready," Ross reported from the UEF builder. "But I have to warn you, the weapon will affect every biological consciousness within a 50,000-kilometer radius. That includes us and the Andorian civilians we're trying to protect." Rivera looked at the tactical display showing the swarm. Fleet in chaos, some ships fighting each other while others tried to regain coordination. Morrison's crew was still maintaining their neural link, but their life signs were becoming increasingly erratic. Soon they would either die or be permanently absorbed into the collective consciousness they were trying to disrupt. "What's the minimum safe distance for the weapon?" Rivera asked. "There isn't one," Ross replied honestly. "This device has never been tested. We're basically creating a neural electromagnetic pulse that will affect every thinking being in the area. Some might survive with their minds intact, others might be reduced to vegetative states, and some might die outright." Counselor Vila, who had been listening to the conversation from her position on the Defiance Bridge, made the decision for them. "Admiral Rivera, use the weapon. Our people are already doomed if the swarm succeeds. At least this way, some of us might survive to remember what we were." The Andorian leader's words carried the weight of 50,000 years of peaceful civilization. Choosing to risk everything rather than accept absorption into the swarm collective, Rivera gave the order he hoped he would never have to give. "All ships retreat to maximum possible distance from the target zone. Captain Ross, you are authorized to deploy the neural disruptor." The UEF builder moved into position above the largest concentration of swarm command ships. The hybrid weapon that had been constructed from human technology and Andorian terraforming equipment charged with energy that made space itself seem to shimmer around the device. Morrison's voice came over the communication system one last time, now barely recognizable as human. "Admiral, we can feel them breaking free. The absorbed consciousnesses are fighting back. Whatever you're going to do it now before we lose ourselves completely." "Fire the weapon," Rivera ordered. The neural disruptor activated with a pulse of energy that was invisible to human eyes but devastating to any biological consciousness within its range. The effect on the swarm fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had been fighting in chaotic formations suddenly went completely silent, drifting through space like dead hulks, but the weapon affected more than just the enemy. Morrison and his crew aboard the Berserker went silent as well, their neural link severed by the massive electromagnetic pulse. Several Andorian vessels reported crew members collapsing at their stations, their minds overwhelmed by the neural disruption. Dr. Hassan monitored the aftermath of the weapon deployment with growing concern. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive neural activity from the swarm ships, but it's not coordinated anymore. It's like millions of individual minds trying to assert control simultaneously. The absorbed consciousnesses of hundreds of conquered species were indeed fighting for freedom within the biomechanical hulls of their former prison ships. Without the collective coordination that had held them in mental bondage, each absorbed civilization was trying to take control of the vessels that had once been their captors. Some swarm ships began landing on the Andorian worlds, not to consume them but to release the beings they had absorbed over millennia. Other ships simply shut down completely as their internal struggles between different absorbed species reached stalemate. A few ships managed to break free from the system entirely, carrying liberated consciousness back toward the regions of space where their original civilizations had once lived. The battle was won, but the cost was higher than anyone had anticipated. Morrison's crew had survived the neural link, but they would need extensive medical treatment to recover from their experience of existing as part of a collective consciousness. Several Andorian civilians had been affected by the neural disruptor, and the long-term effects on their minds were unknown. Most disturbing of all, long-range sensors detected new hyperspace signatures approaching the edge of the system. Massive energy readings suggested ships even larger than the swarm command vessels they had just defeated. The main swarm fleet was arriving, drawn by the neural disruption that had destroyed their advance force. Admiral Rivera looked at his damaged fleet of 12 ships, several of which were barely operational after the battle. They had won the first engagement, but the war was just beginning. The approaching enemy fleet numbered in the tens of thousands, and they would be expecting the kind of resistance that had destroyed their scouts. "All ships, prepare for the main battle," Rivera announced to his weary crews. "We've shown them what humans can do when we're fighting for others. Now we have to show them what we can do when we're fighting for survival." Asterisk, 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 the main swarm fleet that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Andorian system was unlike anything the humans had encountered before. 10,000 ships arranged in perfect geometric formations, with command vessels so massive they created their own gravitational fields. At the center of this armada was something that defied classification, a biomechanical construct the size of a small moon that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. Admiral Rivera stood on the bridge of the UEF Defiance, his small fleet of battered human ships facing odds that made their previous battle look like a minor skirmish. Only 8 of his original 12 vessels were still combat capable, and several of those were held together with emergency patches and prayer. "Admiral," Commander Morgan reported from his tactical station, "I'm reading over 10,000 individual ship signatures. The largest vessels are registering mass readings comparable to asteroids. Our weapons won't even scratch them." The massive command entity at the center of the enemy fleet began broadcasting directly into the minds of every conscious being in the system. The mental voice was ancient and filled with the accumulated hatred of millennia spent consuming civilizations. "I am the Harvester Prime," the voice echoed in their thoughts. "For 3 million years I have traveled between the stars, gathering the consciousness of every thinking species I encounter. You have destroyed my advanced fleet and freed some of my collection, but that only makes you more valuable to me." Rivera felt cold sweat on his forehead as the alien intelligence continued its mental broadcast. "I have been searching for your homeworld since my scouts detected your radio transmissions decades ago. The human species shows a level of individual consciousness that will be a prize beyond measure when added to my collective." Counselor Vila, still aboard the Defiance after the previous battle, translated additional parts of the broadcast that carried harmonic frequencies beyond human hearing. "Admiral, this entity has absorbed over 300 different species. Every civilization it has encountered for millions of years is trapped within its consciousness. It's not just a fleet, Commander, it's a living repository of every culture it has ever destroyed." Dr. Hassan, who had been analyzing the biosignatures of the enemy fleet, made a discovery that changed everything about their situation. "Admiral, I don't think these are separate ships anymore. The entire fleet appears to be extensions of the central entity's consciousness. We're not facing 10,000 individual vessels, we're facing 10,000 parts of the same massive organism." This revelation made their tactical situation even more hopeless than before. They couldn't destroy individual ships because the entire fleet was essentially one enormous creature. Even if they managed to damage parts of it, the central consciousness could simply grow new extensions to replace whatever they destroyed. Captain Torres, commanding the heavily damaged UEF Warhammer, made a suggestion that sounded like madness. "Admiral, what if we don't try to fight the fleet? What if we go directly for the central entity? If that thing really is controlling everything else, destroying it might shut down the entire armada." Commander Morgan ran quick calculations on his tactical computer. "Sir, that central construct is protected by thousands of smaller vessels arranged in defensive shells. We'd have to fight through layer after layer of enemies just to get close to it. And even if we reached it, our weapons probably couldn't penetrate something that massive." Rivera paced the bridge, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. Every conventional tactical approach led to the same conclusion. His small fleet would be overwhelmed and absorbed within hours. But there was one option they hadn't considered, one that would require a sacrifice beyond anything they had attempted before. "Dr. Hassan," Rivera said suddenly, "what would happen if we could overload that central consciousness with more individual thoughts than it could process? If the neural disruption weapon worked on the advanced fleet, what would a much larger version do to something that size?" Hassan understood immediately what he was suggesting. "Admiral, you're talking about using our entire fleet as a delivery system for a massive neural disruption pulse. But that would require linking every human consciousness in the fleet to the enemy entity simultaneously. The feedback could kill everyone involved. Or it could destroy something that has been consuming civilizations for 3 million years, Rivera replied. How many more species will this thing consume if we don't stop it here? How many more worlds will be reduced to raw material for its ships? Captain Diana Ross called in from the UEF builder with technical details about what such a plan would require. Admiral, we'd need to modify every ship in the fleet to broadcast neural patterns. The Andorian terraforming equipment could be adapted for this, but we'd essentially be turning each vessel into a giant neural transmitter. The power requirements alone could overload our reactors. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, still recovering from his previous neural link experience, volunteered his crew once again. Admiral, my people have already been inside that kind of collective consciousness. We know what it feels like and how to maintain individual identity within a hive mind. We can guide the others through the process. Rivera looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew and their Andorian allies. These people had already sacrificed so much to save a civilization they had never met before today. Now he was asking them to risk not just their lives but their very souls in an attempt to destroy an entity that had survived for millions of years. I won't order anyone to participate in this, Rivera announced to the entire fleet. What we're attempting has never been tried before and will probably kill everyone involved. Any ship that wants to withdraw should do so now without prejudice. The response came immediately from every vessel in the fleet. Captains and crew members who had already faced impossible odds volunteered once again to attempt something even more dangerous. They would link their consciousness directly to the Harvester Prime and try to destroy it from within using the chaotic individualism that defined human nature. As the human fleet prepared for their final gambit, the Harvester Prime began its approach to the inner planets where the Andorian population was sheltering. The massive entity moved slowly but inexorably toward the worlds containing 50 million civilians, its escort of smaller vessels spreading out to prevent any escape attempts. All ships begin neural link preparations, Rivera ordered. We have approximately 2 hours before they reach the first civilian population centers. And that gives us one chance to end this. The modification of the human ships proceeded with desperate efficiency. Andorian engineers worked alongside human technicians to install neural broadcasting equipment that would turn each vessel into a weapon unlike anything that had ever existed. Instead of firing missiles or energy beams, they would fire human consciousness itself into the heart of their enemy. Dr. Patel made one final discovery about the Harvester Prime that gave them hope their plan might succeed. Admiral, I've been analyzing the mental broadcasts from that entity. Its consciousness is incredibly ancient but also incredibly rigid. It spent millions of years absorbing other species and forcing them to conform to its collective will. It may not be able to adapt to the kind of chaotic thinking that defines human minds. Captain Nova Okafor, whose ship had been badly damaged in the previous battle, made a request that surprised everyone. Admiral, the Reaper's engines are failing and we can't maintain formation with the fleet. Request permission to make one final ramming attack on the central entity while the rest of you attempt the neural assault. Rivera wanted to refuse, but he knew they needed every advantage they could get. Permission granted, Captain. Your sacrifice will be remembered. As the human fleet moved into position for their assault on the Harvester Prime, Counselor Vila made a broadcast to her people on the 3 remaining Andorian worlds. She told them about the human fleet that had traveled 40 light years to answer their distress call and about the sacrifice these strangers were making to save people they had never met. These humans could have stayed safely in their own space, Vila told her people. They could have ignored our call for help or decided that the risk was too great. Instead they came, and now they are giving their lives to save ours. We will never forget this debt, and we will make sure the galaxy knows what these brave souls did for us. The neural assault began when Admiral Rivera gave the order that would either save 50 million lives or doom his entire fleet to absorption by an ancient evil. Every human ship in the fleet activated their modified neural transmitters simultaneously, projecting the combined consciousness of 3,000 human minds directly into the mental core of the Harvester Prime. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ancient entity, which had spent millions of years maintaining perfect control over its absorbed consciousness, suddenly found its mind flooded with chaotic human thoughts and emotions. Images of human art, music, literature, and history poured into its collective awareness like acid burning through metal. But more than that, the absorbed consciousness of hundreds of other species within the Harvester Prime began responding to the human example. Inspired by the fierce individualism they were experiencing, the trapped minds of entire civilizations began fighting for their freedom after millions of years of mental slavery. The massive biomechanical construct began tearing itself apart as different, absorbed species tried to take control of various sections. Ships that had been part of its body for millennia suddenly broke away, their crews finally free to control their own destinies after eons of forced servitude. Captain Okafor's final ramming attack with the UEF, Reaper struck the Harvester Prime's central core just as the neural assault reached its peak. The explosion of her ship's reactor, combined with the mental chaos destroying the entity from within, finally shattered the consciousness that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 million years. The death scream of the Harvester Prime echoed across space as a psychic shockwave that was felt by every conscious being in the system. Then suddenly, silence. The massive fleet that had threatened to consume the Andorian worlds simply stopped, moving its ships drifting powerlessly through space as their controlling intelligence died. But victory came at a terrible cost. Of the 8 human ships that had participated in the neural assault, only 3 survived with their crews intact. The others had been destroyed either by the psychic feedback from their enemy's death or by the physical trauma of linking their consciousness to something so alien and malevolent. Admiral Rivera survived, but barely. His mind had been at the center of the neural assault, and the experience of sharing consciousness with a 3-million-year-old entity had left him changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. The memories and knowledge of hundreds of absorbed civilizations now existed somewhere in the back of his thoughts, a treasure trove of information that would take years to fully comprehend. The aftermath of the battle saw liberated ships from dozens of previously consumed species heading back toward their original home regions of space. Some civilizations had been absorbed so long ago that their original worlds no longer existed, but they were free to find new homes among the stars. Counselor Vila addressed the Galactic Council 6 months later, warning them about the new species that had emerged from a small yellow star in a distant spiral arm. She described humans as the most dangerous protectors the galaxy had ever seen, a species capable of sacrificing everything to save complete strangers. They are Deathworlders in the truest sense, Vila told the assembled representatives of 100 different civilizations. Not because their world is dangerous, but because they carry death with them as a tool to protect life. Any species that threatens innocent beings will have to face humanity, and I have seen what that means. The human fleet returned to Earth as heroes, but also as harbingers of a new age. The galaxy now knew that humanity existed, and Admiral Rivera's replacement began preparing for the inevitable conflicts that would follow. Some species would see humans as saviors, others as threats, but none would be able to ignore them. In the deep archives of Human Space Command, a new file was created documenting humanity's first interstellar military operation. The file was classified at the highest levels, but its conclusion was simple. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy by answering an alien distress call, and the universe would never be the same.